I've traveled full-time for 12 years. No apartment, no home base, just a new country every few weeks. So, the questions I get most are some version of, where am I right now? Where am I going next? And the big one, how do I actually afford it? And that last one usually comes with an assumption baked in, that I'm rich, or more specifically, that I have a trust fund, that someone else is paying for it. I don't, and nobody is. The real answer has two sides, what comes in and what goes out, and I've spent those 12 years working on both. So I'm going to walk you through the 5 levers that actually make this work, with real numbers where I can share them, and at the end, who this isn't for, because it isn't for everybody. In 2014, I was about a year out of engineering school. I'd just been through a breakup that canceled the move and the relationship I'd built my plans around. And I had almost no savings. I got scrappy fast. I was tutoring online and renting out my apartment on Airbnb, sometimes going to stay with my parents, specifically so I could rent my place out. The engineering salary I'd walked away from was around $50,000, and I was nowhere near replacing it. So when I talk about affording this, I'm not describing something I was handed. I built it over 12 years, one lever at a time, and every one of these is something you can figure out. Lever 1 is income, and specifically income that isn't tied to a place. For most people, it is tied to a place. The job is in a city, and moving somewhere cheaper isn't really on the table. Making your income location independent is what unlocks everything else. For me, that's currently a remote salary. I'm an editor at Forbes Advisor. I know income is the part people are nosiest about, and I get it, but the exact number today matters way less than the shape of how it got here. So let me show you that. Because it did not start at a salary. For the first 4 or 5 years, freelancing was my whole game. And early on, it was barely a trickle. I took whatever writing work I could find, tutored online, substitute taught when I was back in the States. Anything to make a little money. My lowest earning months, I was pulling in a little over $1,000. And I was still traveling because when the income was low, I was able to keep my expenses low by living in less expensive countries. That's the real point. You don't need a big income to start. Mine grew right alongside everything else, which raises the obvious objection. Doesn't this only work because I have a US salary? I'll be straight about it. Earning potential from a wealthy country is a genuine leg up, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. I can get a US job. Someone from Thailand or Nigeria isn't starting from the same place, but she only pulls this off because she's American isn't the whole story either. I have nomad friends traveling full-time on Canadian salaries, European salaries, South American salaries, Australians, New Zealanders, and friends from Asia. And plenty of nomads aren't on a salary at all. They're running their own businesses. The income is the raw material, but the other 4 levers tie into how far it stretches. And those are open to almost anyone. Which brings me to lever 2, and in my opinion, this is the big one. Geographic arbitrage. You earn at one country's scale and you spend at another's. If your income is tied to a high-cost economy, but your daily life isn't tied to that geography, the gap between those two numbers is yours. Here's the data. Across years of tracking, my total annual spending lands somewhere between $39,000 and $49,000. That's my individual share, pretty much regardless of where I go. But I want to be clear, this is not an accident, it's a target. I love traveling everywhere, expensive countries and inexpensive ones, so I balance how much time I spend in each across the year to keep my average in that range. If I wanted that same quality of life but spent all of my time in Western Europe or North America, that number would be a lot higher. And what a place actually costs me isn't just its price level. It's how much there is to spend money on while I'm there. Thailand gets called cheap, and it is relatively, but there's so much there I want to do. Good restaurants, good bars, trips to take, even health care I'll take care of while I'm there. that it's easy to spend more than it looks like I should on paper. Flip side, I spent 6 months traveling West Africa in 2024, moving fast, which usually pushes your cost up, and some of those ended up being my least expensive months, just because there was less of that extra stuff to spend on. The reason this matters beyond lifestyle, geographic arbitrage is career insurance. If my income dropped tomorrow, I could cut my cost of living by choosing a different country next month. Someone with a fixed lease in a fixed city can't do that. It's also exactly why a smaller salary from another country can still make this work. When you can move the outside of that equation that freely, the inside doesn't have to be American-sized. The third lever is the one you might already associate with travel for less: points and miles. It goes straight at two of your biggest costs as a nomad: flights and accommodation. I cover credit cards professionally, and I've taken this to an unreasonable extreme. I hold more than 50 cards. You do not need to do that. The basic version, one solid travel card with no foreign transaction fees, still compounds into real money over time. Here's what that looks like on flights. In 2025, I took more than 20 separate itineraries. Some of those were multiple flights on one booking, and the whole year of flying cost me $3,900. Cash fares plus the taxes on the award tickets. That's about what a single big international trip can run all on its own. Many of those were paid cash fares. The rest were on miles, and the award ones are often business class. I'm not going to tell you I saved the cash price on a business class seat, because I probably wouldn't have paid it, at least not at that price. That seat only happened because I had the miles. The real win isn't one number, it's how much flying that total covers. On top of the flights, the cards throw off a couple $1,000s a year in credits and benefits I'd otherwise have paid cash for. And the one non-negotiable, whether you carry one card or 50, it can't charge foreign transaction fees. Paying an extra 3% on every purchase abroad is one of the most common money leaks there is, and it's completely avoidable. Here's a lever hardly anyone pulls when they're starting out, and it might be the most powerful: tax. Where and how you owe tax is a huge lever, and how much you can do with it depends on your passport and your setup. My more established nomad friends and I talk about this constantly. When this lifestyle is new to you, it's an easy thing to overlook. What I do is the Foreign Earned Income Exclusion, the FEIE. Living abroad as a US citizen, it lets me exclude a big chunk of my income from federal tax, and in 2025, that saved me about $24,000. Money that stays in my pocket purely because of where I live. There's the foreign housing exclusion on top of that if your housing abroad qualifies, and I've got a separate video on how the FEIE actually works. But the catch for Americans is that we can save, not leave. We always have to file taxes, and depending on the situation, we may still owe. Non-Americans often have the far bigger lever here. Many can fully exit their home tax system, and depending on how they set it up, some end up paying zero, which just isn't on the table for a US citizen. My partner Kevin is Canadian and is set up as a resident in Paraguay, which only taxes income earned locally. I'm not an accountant, and this is one area where a specialist more than pays for itself. But the point is simple: tax isn't a fixed cost. It's a lever, and it usually just sits there unpulled. None of the other four work without this last one. I actually track everything. 7+ years of every dollar by category and by country. Not purely because I love spreadsheets. Okay, partly because I love spreadsheets. But because you can't optimize what you don't measure. I use a few tools for it, and shared costs with Kevin run through Splitwise so my numbers stay mine. One thing this let me build is something I call my special trip fund. It's not a separate account, it's a tracked allocation. I run to a monthly target. When I come under, part of the surplus gets earmarked as guilt-free spending money. That's the fund that paid for my trip to Antarctica, which was over $30,000. I've got a whole video on how that system works, so I'll link it too. And tracking isn't about depriving yourself. It's the opposite. I love food, and I've had $5 street food meals and $2,000 Michelin dinners, and both were worth it. Some people would say spending $2,000 on a dinner is crazy, and I'd be nervous to do it too if I hadn't already set the money aside for exactly that. Knowing my numbers is what lets me actually enjoy both ends of the spectrum instead of second guessing them. Now, the part most of these videos skip is who this doesn't work for. To use the FEIE the way I do, I have to spend at least 330 days a year outside the US, which leaves me a maximum of 35 days a year at home with my family, and I have to count them. That's a real cost, not a footnote. The early years were financially scary in a way I've made peace with, but I wouldn't romanticize. And if your income is tied to a place you can't leave yet, a few of these levers aren't open to you. So the place to start is the income side. But if even 2 of these click for you, the math changes a lot. I've put the actual tools, the apps I track with, the cards, the financial setup on one resource page linked below, and my newsletter is where I go deeper on this every week. I read every comment, so tell me, which side of the equation are you more stuck on? Earning the income or stretching it?